So I am, of course, here with John Urbancik, author of many, many incredible books. We'll talk about some of those books, I'm sure, as we get going on in the conversation, but it's an extra special conversation today because we're going to leave this world as we're going to enter John's world through the Palace Theater and all of its secrets, which is primarily what brought us together here right now. John, thank you so much again for joining me to have this conversation and leave our boring world and enter your world. So I've been excited to talk to you about this since I first read that book. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. Excited to go into the Palace Theater every day.
Would you think it's a fair statement if we call this your most ambitious book today? And you've read some pretty ambitious stuff before, but this just is a whole other level.
It's a single book, so I don't know if that would make it more ambitious than, say, the Darkwalker series, which was 6 books over across multiple worlds. But it is possibly the most ambitious single book story that I've done. Oh, say hello to my cat.
Hey, kitty, kitty. I'm sure my cat, oh, she's not behind me anymore. I did have a cat on the shelf, so she's not my invisible pet. So, yeah, because this one here, it's what a hell of a trip it was. I mean, it's like you said, for the singular work, it really feels like you're all over the place because you really do. Yeah, you literally go through the ages of mankind and even before the ages of mankind to other adventures with this character to the point where, at least for me, I'm a little slow sometimes where I'm paying attention to your original character, the magician and the thief, who's one of the same character, as well, of course, our assistant and our assassin, who's also one of the same character. And you're realizing what the heck is going on. I've read you before, so I trust that I'm in very good hands with you. But at the same time, everything just seems very unsettling. Like I've entered some sort of a weird funhouse where the angles and everything just seems a bit off. But then as you go along, things start clicking and you realize this expansive universe that you have is all connected. Can you maybe, because I know you're going to be able to put in better words than I can. This was definitely, I did review this for Rumor, but it was a tougher one to review because you only give me 300 words. And how do you fit all these universes into such a small space? So what's your elevator pitch as people are probably watching this going, what the heck are you talking about?
Well, elevator pitch. I've not been good at elevator pitches. This is a book about magic and mythology and theaters. Theaters, I think, are associated with magic and mythology automatically already anyway. So just bringing all of that together through the lens of me.
And
Yes.
and how did you what plan of the sea? Because I understand that you wrote this sort of in stages all over the world, which is maybe, certainly as a photographer and as the kind of creative mind that you are, we were just talking about this the other day about how, even the most mundane environment, such as, a 9 to 5 job can be so inspiring for various stories. And you literally wrote this, I think, in 3 major places around the world. And I can only imagine that must have helped with the expansive feel of this entire book.
Well, the places contributed a little bit to the stories I was writing. It started. I was living in Virginia, and I started writing it there. The book structurally, it's almost like 5 novellas that are interconnected, but it is all one story. They are very tightly interconnected, but I wrote each one individually. I wrote the first 2 in Virginia, but from Virginia I moved to Madrid, and because of visa issues, I had to spend some of the time that I was living in Madrid. Actually, I had to come back to the States. So I was living in Florida for 3 months. And during that 3 months, I wrote I wrote the third novella. And then I went back to Spain. Actually, I think I wrote the third and the fourth during the first drafts.
Okay.
And then I went back to Madrid and I wrote the 5th one to tie it all together. So in one of them, I mentioned the Opera House in Madrid. That definitely took place after I got to Madrid. So if that was the 4th, then I wrote the last 2. It's been 5 years since I wrote the first draft of this. So I don't specifically remember everything. I know I was in Virginia when I started. I remember the wall because I worked in a place with a very high ceiling, and it was the wall itself was about the width of my desk. So there was my
Well,
desk, and there was like 20 feet of wall above it, and that's where I worked. They wrote the first bit, and it was fun to get into that, and it was fun to see where those places would go. And I wasn't in a rush to get it done as a single project, although it was always in my head as a single project. I never intended it to really be separate,
right.
although I thought they could be done separately. And I tried that, but it didn't work out.
Well, um, not to take this the wrong way, hopefully, but I'm glad it didn't work out that way because I think that that almost would have been like reading Brian Keene's um first book, of course, The Rising, without knowledge of the second book, which is really the sequel, because you get this idea that's just driving you mad because you know there's got to be more to it and you don't know what else there is. So I think that would have drove me mad reading your book in, I guess, its original sections of novellas, because I would have finished one section and been absolutely mad if I had to wait any kind of a time to get the second parts, because that's when it really clicks, is when you get into the next section. You begin it, and then all of a sudden light bulbs as the reader goes off. Oh wow, this is this timeline over here. I'm trying not to give away any spoilers, but then you really realize how connected some of the people are to each other and this massive universe that's
There are repeating characters in every section.
right.
And the final section kind of ties it all together, almost like, because one of my influences would have been comic books at one point, and I was a teenager when Crisis on Infinite Earths came out and when Secret Wars came out. And so you have all of these heroes brought to a single place to fight a single villain. And I thought I could do something like that, but do it within the confines of a single book. That was part of the idea behind this. That was part of how I ended up doing it the way that I did. But there are parts that I was never really 100% sure would work for everyone. Like the second part of the book is that each part is titled. And the second part is called The Great and Tragic Romance of Dale and the Goddess. And it is the history, or no, not the history, the mythology or the mythological history of the world from before the beginning, basically to the time of the book. And that's the part where I feared that I might lose more people, because that is the most like straightforward fantasy
Right.
part of the book. But I still think it's an important part of the story. I don't think it would work without that.
No, absolutely not. And I found that it was certainly within, once I got to the fourth section of the book, because you've already introduced some other characters in the second section, that it really tied it all together, and I wouldn't have had that oh wow moment if it wasn't for that second part. And not to mention, I think it really kind of delves into one of the big strengths that you have, which is creating these amazing worlds, which I don't think you could do it without that sort of more fantastical environment that you created, where if you're talking with gods and goddesses, you make your own rules, so you're not really confined to anything. And I think that was a really nice way to showcase what you could do without any borders. And then you kind of created some borders in some of the other sections that you did, certainly with the third section, where you have an apprentice who was trying to find a lost book and was kind of a bit of a spy as well. And then in the third one, then that really develops into a big integral part of the story. And I'm doing terrible trying. As everybody can probably get the sense of it, I'm not confused on what the book's about, but I'm trying to tread really carefully so I don't give any spoilers out, because there's just so many holy crap moments as you're going through all of it, as you realize light bulbs start going off and you can see the connections all the
There
way
are
through.
connections not just within this book, but within other books and other novellas. So, as an example, that book that she's looking for in the third part of The Secret History is also the title of a novella of mine, in which there's a woman looking for that book because it was written by her father.
Oh,
and she's looking for the same book that we have in this. So there's other things that tie back to other stories of mine. But I every time that I did that, I did it in a way that if you did not recognize the illusion, that what it was referring to, that it wouldn't matter. The
Right.
book is still as important as it is to that story, but it's essentially a MacGuffin in that part because the character doesn't care about the book. She's just trying to get it because that's the quest that she's been sent on.
Right. Right. Because she very much wants what that quest will hopefully achieve for her.
Yes.
And boy, she surprises the rest of us what happens. And how much fun is that too? Because like one of the common themes of this, and I guess really the common themes of any character that is not just a cardboard cutout, especially to have a fantastic villain and have fantastic anti-heroes where you get the sense that they're there to try to save the day as they see it, but we're not really quite sure what their intentions are or how selfishly they're going after these endeavors. And this book is 100% a which I'm looking for. Just a fantastic study in dualities when it comes to personalities, and that obviously plays very specifically, certainly as you're going through in that first part where you have the literal mirrored images of these two characters, of the magician thief and the assassin assistant.
I don't think it's spoiling much of anything if I tell you what happens in the first scene, which is the main character, Nicholas, walks through a mirror into the world on the inside of the mirror. At the same time, the version of him from inside the mirror walks into his world. He is a magician, and his mirror self is a thief. Because I always thought that's the same skill set. They're both sleight of hand and deception.
Right. Yeah,
So,
they're almost the same, different sides of the same coin in a way. They're kind of opposing each other, but they're complementary oppositions.
so it was fun to work with that and imagine that, and also how would people in his life be different on the other side of the mirror? How would the world itself be different? And how would his interaction with magic be different, considering he is essentially a struggling / failing stage magician working with illusion, which, as we find out in the third part, is the simplest of the forms of magic. When the magician's assistant in the third part is called the magician's assistant, starts off by telling you there are 7 types of magic, and illusion is the easiest and simplest and most basic and least impressive. And that doesn't entirely turn out to be true. But it also doesn't turn out to be true that there are only 7 types of magic.
Yeah, and when you're creating these worlds and you're creating these the rule sets as well, is that how I know you're obviously you read probably twice as much as you write or more so. Was a lot of that things that you learned along the way that was already embedded in mythological worlds and maybe on within your own research, or is it all imagination and magic?
I think there was probably a lot of influence from, as an example, Greek mythology in the mythological section of that. I think even one of the gods was named Apollo, which is direct out of Greek and Roman mythology. They both call
Right.
and I probably borrowed elements from other types of mythologies as well, because I wanted it to be more expansive than just the Mediterranean, which is why we have a difference between a jungle cat and a forest cat.
Right.
Part of the story, the mythological story, where one of those is an ally to a character and one of them is not. They're basically the same, but they're entirely different types of cats. In my mind, one was a jaguar and the other was a leopard. And they're slightly different, but they're very, very similar. And both of them have been, at some point, called a panther by different people.
Right.
So, I try to incorporate stuff like that. And I pulled from, look, everything I've ever known and everything I've ever done has been pulled into that. And the journey through the desert at one point is in there. The meals, the acrobats, the carnivals and circuses, um, even the idea of the White City, which is where all the like gods and goddesses hang out, is all drawn from other sources, but none of it is directly drawn from anything. None of it is exactly what that was. But
Gotcha.
even the wedding gifts are drawn from real life.
Yeah, because that was fascinating. Everybody gets this box, and some of them know what to do with it. Some of them don't. Some of them find out what it's all about before they even know what to do with it. And where did that idea come from with the wedding gift? That was
So
because I
never
remember
really
you saying that.
much of anything. The
Right.
wedding gifts were eggs, like the Fabergé imperial eggs, of which there were only ever 50 made. And I was living in Richmond at the time, and you might not know, but the Richmond Museum of Fine Arts, the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond, has the largest collection of imperial Fabergé eggs outside of Russia.
Hey,
There's,
can you explain what a Fabergé imperial egg is?
so the imperial eggs were specifically they were like, they were probably like hand size. You would hold them like this or something. They were intricately designed, uh, gold and jewel encrusted, and um, fancy painting, miniature painting on the inside of some of these. Some of them opened and they became something more when you opened it than just when they were closed. And they were they were gifts specifically made as an Easter gift from the Tsar to the Tsarina.
Okay.
Um, and he gave her one for her birthday every year. They were made specially by Fabergé. Fabergé made other eggs, and they're known for other fancy, high-end stuff, not just eggs. Um, but there are 10 in Russia. I mean, 10 in Moscow, 9 in St. Petersburg, Russia, and 5 in Richmond, Virginia.
Interesting.
There are 3 at the Met in New York. There are 3 at the I want to say the Tate in London, one of the big museums in London. There are 3 of them. Nobody else has more than 3,
Except for
and
Virginia.
except for Virginia, which has 5. And I didn't realize that my first time walking through the museum. I'm just walking through and it's like, oh, here's some paintings, nothing really super impressive. Here's some sculpture. Oh, look, there's a whole section on like Art Deco radios and
Yeah.
toasters and stuff like that. And then I enter a room and I'm surrounded by 5 pedestals, each of which is featuring one of these imperial eggs with the entire story of everything about the eggs on the walls and every
Oh, that'd be cool.
side of this room. And this room was adjoined by another room that was other Fabergé and Fabergé-like things from that time frame. And that was just magnificent. And I had always had something of a fascination with these. I once wrote a story in, I think it's in the collection, the Museum of Curiosities, called The Egg Thief. And that kind of features into that a little bit. Although it starts with somebody stealing a dozen eggs in a grocery store, and later you get people juggling eggs, and that's all fine and fun. But there was a point to all of that, and that's like a 3-page story. It's not,
Yeah.
but that fed into that. That's why I made those the gifts, and because he was the god of mazes and mysteries, giving these as a gift, I had to make them a puzzle as well, not just a thing that will open, but a thing that you have to figure out how to open.
Right.
And the first one that we see open in the story is opened by someone who is not the person who was supposed to receive that one. And that goes very badly for them.
just a little bit. Uh, it so yeah, I'm gonna have to check that out the next time I'm up there for the AuthorCon next year. I think I'm gonna have to stop by Richmond and check that out. Uh,
AuthorCon is in Williamsburg, Virginia, which is about an hour from Richmond.
yeah, yeah, Richmond's not too bad. And that's I think Richmond's where the Hollywood Cemetery is it not?
Yes.
Okay, I was there. I was gonna say last year, this past year, the Hollywood Cemetery. That was interesting.
There's also a Poe Museum in Richmond, which is really, really cool.
That's neat. Yeah, I heard about that as well. We only had so much time, so we did we did the where all the dead people are. For that was fascinating. So yeah, there's so much history out there, so much history. I had no idea it was such a touristy destination until I went there, and I'm like, I never knew this. There's this place is just fascinating with all the museums and all the cool things to see out there. So, one of the things too, John, I want to ask you about it, which is well, a couple of things that fascinates me that seems to be a commonality with a lot of the work that you tend to write. I mean, I read an article a bit ago. It was about psychological dissonance, and I thought that's really fascinating. And it seems to be a real pull for, I guess, fantastic, interesting heroes as well as villains. And you really seem to draw a lot on that throughout your stories and a lot of your characters, where they seem really divided on what they should do and what they have to do, whether it's for survival or for, greater purpose to save the world or what have you. I don't know if that's something you do deliberately or if that's something that you're aware of maybe in your own writing or something you might totally disagree with because you're writing better than I do because you write it.
Isn't that something that we all deal with as writers? For any type of artist who's not making a living purely doing their art, they've got to do the day job, and that's what they have to do.
Yeah.
In order to pay for rent, pay for food, keep the cat alive, pay for health insurance, pay for books and supplies and pens.
Yes.
Absurd. Um, so I think I don't think I consciously think about it. I think it's just a natural part of the life I live.
Gotcha. I just wonder about some of your characters if you purposely sort of think, well, what's going to really be a monkey wrench in this particular character? Certainly with, and I think this is such a great example of it as well. Secrets of the Palace Theater, where you have, a few of your main characters in there that literally end up standing beside themselves and are having to deal with their polar opposite. I mean, sometimes it's just more of a psychological thing, and we might be able to ignore that voice and just make completely horrible choices despite that voice. Whereas here, they're physically in the same room and they really are having to fight to collaborate with each other. I mean, that must have just been a fascinating thing for you to explore and thought, what's the worst case imaginable for these two people to be in the same room and make it exciting and different, but also somewhat realistic?
I thought the worst case scenario was that it wasn't just going to be two. um, Yeah, I don't know that I consciously thought that because we are going back. It would be about 7 years ago that I wrote the very beginning of the story,
Okay.
and I don't know that I was consciously thinking of that. But the mirror thing, first of all, the mirror thing has always been fascinating to me because I think of it as a pathway, a portal to other places, other dimensions, other types of places. That has been used in folklore and mythology and legend for longer than I think we've recorded history. You could look at things like recently, 10 or 15 years ago, there's a book called Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and they use the mirror to travel between places through the fairy realms. And I don't think that was a unique idea to that book, but it was one of the best executions of it that I'd seen. And I thought this was kind of a variation of that type of thing. So mirrors have always been like that for me. I've always loved the idea of parallel universes and alternative universes, and not just parallel, but like perpendicular universes, which would be different because parallel would be like two things that are going off, never touch, and perpendicular things that cross. And what would happen in things like that? And I don't think I really explored that here. I think I barely even touched the surface of that. That might be something else. That might be another project that I haven't started working on yet.
Interesting, interesting. Maybe Dark Walker part 7?
Not planning a 7. 6 ended that story.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of characters in there that might have their own stories. So, so maybe I'll go back to that world too. That is not planned right now.
Right. But I kind of brings me up to another curiosity as well, is that do you find it any less stressful on you or more demanding of you when you're putting together a singular novel like that is ambitious, that has, like you said, some very distinct parts, and you can certainly describe it per novella within this. It's almost like an omnibus of itself, compared to, say, something where you're having all these singular books with the Dark Walker series, which certainly work fair. They work well on their own, but as when you read them collectively, you really do see the connection and the continuance of the story and the stakes getting higher. Do you find it any more demanding because you've got to get it right all in this one book, as opposed to giving it time to breathe in between book 1 to book 6 with the Dark Walker series?
I don't know if I did, because in a way it was 5 novellas. So it kind of had the same little break. Like I took a break after the first one.
Yeah.
And then after the second one, I mean, not a long break, but there was time. It took a while to finish the first draft of this book. And it took almost 20 years to write the entire Dark Walker series. The first draft was written in 2000. The first draft of the first book was 2002 or 3. The last draft of the last book wasn't until 2020.
Yeah,
So
they had very different tones throughout it too. Certainly with 3 or 4 and 5 were just, you just took it all out on those 2 books. It was just all out brutal. And this poor guy, like, what else could possibly happen to this poor guy? Like, what the hell?
There were certain things that I just kind of felt had to be in there. But, the way I describe it is you've got to raise the stakes in every time. So in the first book, they're in Orlando and he's learning that he can walk through the dark untouched by things because they can't touch him because of the nature of what he is. But then that gets reversed or inverted, and that becomes a problem because things are drawn to him. So in book 2, they go to hell. Book 2 is Inferno. And what do you do to keep raising the stakes after that? Well, book 3, I sent them to Virginia.
Which is much worse than hell.
It's gotta be, right? And
Absolutely.
in book 4 is called Armageddon, which is not the end of the world precisely. Armageddon is actually the mountain where the end of the world begins in the Bible, roughly. I may be slightly misremembering that, but it's a place, not a time. And so the mountain, Armageddon, there's a valley. What would be the valley next to Armageddon? And I'm like, well, that would have to be Shangri-La, right? Because you've got to have the opposition between the good and the bad. And then book 5, I thought, well, what's the worst possible way I can open this with a character who I established is nearly impervious to everything? Well, let's take all of that away. And I end book 5 in a way that I'm fairly sure that there are several people who want to punch me and wouldn't be right in doing so. And it makes you think, how do you even start a book 6 after doing that to that character? And yet book 6 concludes the story in a way that I think is natural and ties back a lot of things through the previous books, all the way back to the first book, in a way that I wasn't planning when I wrote the first book. I had an entirely different, architectural sketch of what the Dark Walker series would be when I started writing book 2. Because honestly, when I was writing book 1, it was intended to be a standalone book. It was just Dark Walker.
Which is incredible to think, because you really take it so many different places you go along. And it just seems that every book was a natural progression of this to like you said, the very last one that tied it all together. I'm not going to say neatly, but it certainly tied it all together. And the last book was, I don't know, for me, it felt like it was a book of redemption. for everything that everybody had been through, whether a lot of those characters got to make it to the last book or not, it just felt like, well, all the hell that they've been through, this is why. It all came down to that one final showdown I found with the the two Dark Walkers, really.
Well, Dark Walker 5 and 6, the last two books, and also a novella that is coming out later this summer called Clockwork Ravens. I wrote all of those. I wrote all three of those, one after the other, during COVID, right after my partner died. So the fact that death is a major component of all three of these books. Actually, another book that hasn't been published yet and I haven't sold and I'm not even trying to sell right now, but probably still will at some point.
Okay.
Everybody does a vampire book when someone dies. I don't know why. Anne Rice did the Interview with the Vampire right after losing her daughter, I think.
Oh, I had no idea.
Losing somebody. Might have been her husband. I don't remember. It's because it's been a while since I've read this, but it seems to be a common theme. Oh, somebody in my life, somebody important to my life has died. So I guess it's time to write a vampire
novel. I mean, you've got vampires in the Dark Walker series.
Yes, but those are not a vampire novel. They're vampires. The vampire novel I have may also involve a little bit of fantasy and romantic. It was a combination of a vampire story idea I had and a romantic fantasy idea I had. And after Mary died, after I left Madrid, I couldn't see doing the romantic fantasy set in Madrid anymore. I mean, Madrid was important to that story, but for me, the magic of Madrid died also.
Yeah, that'd be so hard to get back into that romantic side when all you want to do is lash out maybe on those particular tropes.
So 4 projects in a row are very focused on death and dealing with that. And I think, A Secret History of the Palace Theater was the last thing I wrote before she died. And those 4 books were the first things that I wrote after. It took 4, it probably took more than that, but it took 4 books for me to get through that so that I could write other things.
Yeah, I mean, I know we talked a little bit about this before, John, but how did you, I mean, that must have been so hard for you, especially a book that you had written quite a while ago and written during, some fantastic times in your life to what stood out the worst time in your life, and then having to go back again to sort of revise that and get it ready for publication. What was that like? I mean, did you find it more rewarding and cathartic to be worth the pain of going through that? I mean, obviously you got through it, but what do you find the cost of going through that for you?
I think the cost was highest on the vampire book. When I went through doing revisions on that was the most difficult, because that was essentially distilling my entire experience with Madrid, including everything good about it, all the way up to everything bad, which included Mary getting diagnosed with cancer, and she didn't die in Madrid. I got her back to her parents' house before that happened, but it was only 2 weeks after we left Madrid that she died. And so that book is a difficult book for me to go back and look at. The Dark Walker books, I don't really see it. Clockwork Ravens, I could show you because I have a copy next to me.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've got Clockwork Ravens over here. I was lucky enough to grab from the AuthorCon.
Clockwork Ravens is in part dealing with her death, but it's also a celebration of life in a way. And you might not have realized, but I dedicated Clockwork Ravens to somebody, and it's one of the few books I've dedicated to somebody who's alive. My first novel was dedicated to my father after he died. I have several books, poetry books, that are dedicated to Mary after she died. This is one of the few that are dedicated to somebody who's still alive. This is the person who helped me get through the darkest parts after. And
And
so this book, in a very real way, Clockwork Ravens, is because of her. I would not have written this. This is not a direct response to Mary dying. I would not have written this book if not for my friend who I dedicated it to.
okay, can we say who your friend is, or can I hold it up?
Yeah, her name is Morley.
Yeah, yeah, right in there. So I don't know if you can see that too well.
I don't think you can.
Oh, right there you go.
There
You
you
can
go.
hold it, Silda or Morgan. And so, with such an important book, and obviously you got this one published as you're gonna, it's gonna come out for everybody else very soon. So everybody watching this, go get it. Is it up for pre-order yet, John?
No, I do not believe so. Because I was focused on secret history.
Right.
Although it was only, I don't know when this is going to air, but for me, it was a week ago that we had the release party for secret history.
Yeah.
So, it's still a couple of months before Clockwork Ravens comes out. So I'd like to, I don't know, take a day to relax. There's no little ones, but to take a day to breathe and say, yes, secret history is out. Everybody is now invited to the Palace Theater, and I could worry about the next book next. But I will. This is the first one that I'm actually doing myself as a hardcover. There will also be a paperback and a Kindle version, just like there are most things. And I will probably set that up for pre-order for the Kindle at some point, because that is easy to do. The only way I could do pre-orders is to have somebody else for a paperback or a hardcover, is to do them through a shop, a store. So I was able to do that with Secret History through Vortex Books, which is in Columbia, Pennsylvania, and that not very far from where I live now.
Yep.
And they're the ones that hosted the release party. And
Yep, at Vortex.
yes, Vortex Books, which is owned by Brian Keene and Mary St. John, who are friends of mine. I've known Brian now for like 25 years, Mary for probably 20.
Yeah, I saw the pictures from that stuff for the party, and I'm like, man, I need to like live closer to. So it's not such a trek over there. I mean, I think even a drive, it's 10 hours maybe. I think, which I guess is not bad. You could do it in a day, so it's not, how bad is it really? But so, and actually, one of our local guys up there, John R. Little, was there too. He lives about 20 minutes away from me right now, if that.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. I saw everybody, almost everyone who's come through the store to sign at the store, I've seen. Some of them are people I know. I've known John Little for years. I actually did a cover for, my photo is the cover of one of his books going back to like 2007 or 8.
That's right. He mentions you, actually. It's funny because he started mentioning you in his book that he just did. I did a first live interview with him at a nice little pub over here. My quirky little memoir, his quirky little memoir, but it's called My Quirky Little Memoir. Yep. And he starts mentioning that I had my friend photographer who's an incredible guy. And I'm like, I wonder if that's John. And then a few words later, he mentioned you by name. So I'm like, yeah. And I saw the photo too, and I just recognized it as it just looked very familiar as somewhat the stuff that you would do. The
book was called Memory Tree, and that tree that I shot was in New Zealand. You probably have seen that tree in The Lord of the Rings, because I was shooting at Matamata, which is the place where they shot Hobbiton.
Oh, that's cool. That's really cool. That just gives it a whole other meaning now that when I look at that. I actually have it in my queue. I've read a bunch of his books recently, and that's another one that I've got fired up on my e-reader to read whenever I have a chance to.
I am actually a very slow reader. He told me, he mentions me in there, but I haven't been able to read it
yet. Yeah, it's a fantastic book. So I'm sure you'll enjoy it. It's, especially if you've been in the industry for so long as well. I know even for me, for the amount of people that I've known over the years, it was such a walk down memory lane that I know you'll get even more out of it probably.
Mhm.
So, but going back though, I know we kind of went on a bit of a side quest here from the question I want to ask you regarding. I'm going to go back to Clockwork Orange and maybe your Clockwork Raven. Sorry,
I had nothing to do with Clockwork Orange. I'm too young to have made that.
I know. But Clockwork Raven, uh, you mentioned that. I mean, it's obviously a super personal book for you, and that you wouldn't have gotten through it if it wasn't for Morgan. When you're writing such a personal book, especially this one, what was it about Morgan that got you through that? No, and maybe I should back up a little bit. When you said you don't think you could have got through that, do you mean finish writing the book or actually going revisiting it when you're doing the revisions for publication?
I don't think I would have written that book if not. The book that she got me through was the vampire book. Yeah, she got me through um, the initial, not the initial, because I wandered wandered the U.S. for a while,
Yeah.
and then stayed at my mother's house for about a month. This was just before COVID became a thing,
Yeah.
and during that month, Morgan and I reconnected, and I mean we had been friendly since before that. I mean, I've known her. I'd already known her for over 10 years.
Yeah.
But we reconnected and connected on a deeper level because we both had loss. We both had things to work through, and for whatever reason, um, we were able to work through them better together than we could on our own. And I would tell her, what I was going through while I was writing that book, and I think she kept me sane. And so Clockwork Ravens became kind of an homage in a way. And it's like the character in that story is not Rosa, is not Morgan. But there are a lot of elements to the story that do come from Morgan and her history. Like up to and including I don't know if you've read it yet, but there's a point where Rosa cuts herself, and she describes the blood as silver.
Hmm.
And that's not meant to be supernatural in any way. Morgan is colorblind. She sees red as silver.
Oh.
So, little things like that are interspersed throughout to make it a very personal book for me and also for her.
That's awesome.
And a lot of those elements just kind of wouldn't have gotten into my head if I hadn't known her. Like if I hadn't known her, I could never.
Yeah. Well, thankfully that she helped get you through that. Sure, there's an alarm going off somewhere.
Is it on your side or my side?
I think it's on my side.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely on my side. That's all right. You know what? Alarms are bound to go off during this conversation at some point. So, it's kind of a little bit, I guess, regarding the process you went through with the vampire book. Does it have a title, or is it just the vampire? We just call it the vampire book.
It's actually called Vampires of Madrid.
Vampires of Madrid. Oh, now that you mentioned that, I think you did mention that to me in another conversation that we had a bit ago.
I did.
Yeah, but I think it was in passing. I don't think we had as much of a conversation about it as we're having about it now.
Among things, it asks and answers the question: why are there no vampire stories set in Madrid?
I remember you saying that.
That was the initial. That was what spurred the idea of that story in the first place, and the part that spurred the romantic fantasy. In real life, we moved into an apartment overlooking the garden behind the Palacio Real, the royal palace, the palace of the royal family, the official residence of the royal family. It was a furnished apartment, and Mary got there before I did. And there was a book in the apartment. Just one book. Cervantes, the man from La Mancha, but it was
Okay.
written. It was Spanish. It was a Spanish version of the book. We were right down the road. We were a 2-minute walk from Plaza de España, which has this massive statue honoring Cervantes and Don Quixote, and uh, it was an amazing, just the idea that that book was already there in the apartment. I have it now. It is in my storage unit. And that combined with the fact that everywhere you go in Madrid, there's graffiti on doors. And some of it is really good, high end art
I
done.
would love that.
And they also have playing cards that are different than the playing cards that we know in the United States and Canada. They've got different suits. They've got a different number of cards in their deck. They have a different kind of setup for them, and that was also part of the idea, incorporating all of those things. Two separate stories here.
Yeah.
One was the vampires, and one was the romantic fantasy that starts with an American moving into an apartment in Madrid, which has got a Spanish language version of Don Quixote. And inside the book, there is a single playing card. And on the back of the card, someone has, or maybe it's the front of the card, I don't even remember now. Someone has drawn an image that he has seen because it matches the graffiti on one of the doors in his neighborhood.
Oh, okay.
So that was how the romantic fantasy book was supposed to start. And so in this case, I mashed the two of those ideas together and went with that in whatever direction it led me, which turned out to be violent, bloody. Right, one of my bloodiest books.
That's saying a lot. That's saying a lot because you didn't mess. I mean, I can't imagine it to be much more bloodier than the dark, the Dark Walker book 5. Like,
you're just thinking specifically of the opening scene.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of scenes in that one, like, geez, that poor guy. But yeah, especially the opening scene was just one of the bloodiest, most violent scenes I think I've read of yours so far.
And I don't do bloody violent. I'm not an extreme writer. I don't do that very often, but every once in a while I have a scene where I don't pull punches. I'll get there, but I'm more of a dark fantasy type of person than an outright horror type of person. And I think that shows in a lot of things that I write. But the Dark Walker books, I think of those as horror adventures.
Yeah, I could see that. Certainly dark fantasy, dark adventure horror.
And Vampires of Madrid is a horror novel that doesn't know how to color in the lines of any genre, which is true of books like my Secret History doesn't stay within the lines of any single genre either, because by part 4 of the Secret History, we're dealing with cultists and otherworldly cosmic terrors.
I love the opera singer too. I'm like, where did she's not really of this world. She's not really of another world, and you're trying to figure all that out too, like that opera singer. I mean, it's a dark fantasy with opera.
Well, that's been done before. I mean,
Phantom of the Opera for sure.
Phantom of the Opera and The Fifth Element is a
that's true
fiction-y dark fantasy with opera,
but it's not as nuanced as yours though. Yours is a lot more nuanced. I think with both the Phantom of the Opera and The Fifth Element, you knew exactly what you're getting. This is an alien, or the Phantom. You've got this is just a evil entity trying to possess what's her face? Can't think of her name right now. I want to say Christina, but that was the original actress. one of the original opera singers that did her. I think it's been a while
I
after I
think the
visit my camp.
character was Christina.
That was Christina. Okay,
I think so.
because I'm thinking Christina Brightman, the one of the vocalists.
No, Sarah Brightman.
Sarah Brightman. That's so was Christina was the character's name. Okay, shoot, good.
I would be lying if I didn't say that the Phantom of the Opera wasn't it was obviously an influence on the secret history of the Palace Theater, but so was my experience with the actual Garnier Opera House in Paris, the which that the original book and the movie are set, and then later the Broadway play and the other um, several movies of that on. But also my experience with the Opera House in Sydney had an impact on that.
And is that the one? Sorry, the Opera House in Sydney. Is that the one that you chose as the cover for the book?
No, the Opera House in Sydney is just called the Opera House, the Sydney Opera House, and that is on the new cover for Stale Reality.
Okay. There's something. You got me looking here. I've got that one somewhere too.
No, the so
So I knock over my Xenophile.
yeah. Yeah, if you look on the one side of that, that is the front of that is the Opera House from the war.
Oh, okay. I think this guy down here.
Sorry. Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
The Sailors.
Very.
So that had an impact on it, and also other theaters, because I've been in much smaller theaters than that. I've been in a Palace Theater or two, and I've been in a State Theater or two, and I've been in all sorts of different places. The Palace Theater featured on the cover of The Secret History is actually one that I happened to walk past while doing my wander across the U.S. I didn't look for a Palace Theater. I just happened to be there, and I was like, I just wrote a book that takes place in a Palace Theater. I'm going to take a picture. I didn't know it was going to be the cover of the book. Like,
Yeah.
5 years later, that wasn't ever part of the plan. I just like the idea.
Just not your plan. I'm sure it was a part of a plan. Serendipity for you, right?
Passive. I think the most exciting part of the whole Palace Theater thing is that I released a book called The Secret History of the Palace Theater in the same year that New York City's Palace Theater reopened.
That's just the kind of influence that you have.
They do that.
Exactly. It's like, oh, we better take full advantage of this guy's book.
But if you go through the Secret History, you realize that all the theaters connected anyway. So
Yeah.
Even my experience with the Opera House in Madrid, which I never went in. I was never inside that Opera House, but I was outside it a lot because it was right next to the palace. And so if I was walking to a variety of different places that I went to frequently, I walked right past the Opera House. I never got inside. I regret that. But, our original plan was to stay there a little longer than we did. Things got screwed up.
Yeah, and obviously when you're coming back, you're not exactly thinking of going out and touring Palace theaters and so. And at that time,
I would love for people to get on like Twitter or Facebook or Instagram and then just like tag me in pictures of their Palace theaters, because there's Palace theaters all over the place. There's a Palace Theater in London. There's all over, and it's the best part is it doesn't even have to be called the Palace Theater to still be a Palace Theater. So shoot your State Theater, shoot the I don't remember the name of the one in Tokyo. Shoot that theater. Shoot pictures of the Garnier in Paris, or the new Opera House in Paris, which is like glass and chrome, very, very different feel to the like gothicness of the Garnier.
that'd be awesome. I wonder if you could work that some sort of PR thing for that, where if they shoot you a picture of this, you can tag them and then they get maybe 10% off or something or
I don't know how to work that part of it. That would have to deal with where they're buying the books.
true.
Remember, I'm not a bookseller,
Yeah,
but it would still be cool if they would start like just tagging me with those pictures.
that'd be awesome. Or maybe shoot them a digital copy of a book that you have already or something, or a short story perhaps.
So I could do a short story. I could do a short story set in the Palace Theater. How's that?
That that'd be perfect. There you go. There's some homework.
Because the Palace Theater, as it exists in this book,
Yeah.
this is basically its history from beginning to end, right? But there's more past the end. And I'm not going to give anything away. But there is another novella that I wrote 15 years ago. It was published by Bad Wing Books. No, it was not published by Bad Wing Books. It was just after I had published several novellas of Bad Wing Books. And it came out only in Kindle, called Quicksilver.
I
Now,
don't know if I've heard of that.
Quicksilver. Pocket full of smoke, fistful of glass.
I've heard you mention that before.
And that is set in the theater in midnight. And there is a direct connection between that theater and the theater, the Palace Theater in this book. Even though that is the Palais Royal, there is a connection.
Now, are we going to see another reincarnation of that one? Because I know, of course, you're reissuing, I think, because they're re-releasing a lot of your older titles, freshen them up with covers and putting them out there. Are we going to get to see that one come out as well?
I did a few of those. I hadn't really thought about that. Pocket full of smoke, fistful of glass has never been in paperback by itself.
That's
It was
fantastic. I know.
the collection, the Tales of the Fantastic and the Phantasmagoria. But that's a massive 175,000 word collection of novellas.
Yeah.
I probably should put Pocket Full of Smoke.
But how long is that one?
It's a novella. It's like 20,000 words. Give or take. Yeah, somewhere between 15 and 25.
Gotcha. Okay.
But it was also written by a different version of me than the version of me that wrote The Secret History. I had changed drastically in the 10 years between the first draft of one and the first draft of the other.
Which I suppose makes sense because there's so many evolutions that happen in the Palace Theater that you wrote about that if we read a different version of you, that would kind of fit in. I mean, you left it very wide open.
Even the Darkwalker books, Darkwalker 1 and Darkwalker 2 were written by two different people other than me. They were me, but they were other previous versions of me that didn't know what I knew by the time I was writing 3 and 4. And then 3 and 4, after 3 and 4, I did 5 and 6 together. So, but 1 was written originally in 2003-ish. 2 was written about 2010. 3 and 4 about 2017. And 5 and 6 in 2020, while the world was ending.
Yeah, might as well, right? Speaking of which, I did want to ask you about that too, if you don't mind putting your boot camp professor hat on for a minute to give a bit of advice, because I know a lot of people that are watching my podcast videos here. A lot of them are either, huge readers, of course, but there's a few of them in there that really seem to enjoy some of the advice and that are writers as well at different levels. And I know this is one of my favorite panels when I was at the AuthorCon. They did it again this year. I missed it this year. I was too busy talking to authors, and I missed it completely. But it was about trauma in horror, and kind of, I think it was writing through the trauma. It might have been. Shout out to Candace Nola. She moderated the two of them. Did an amazing job last year. I'm sure she did this year as well. Like I said, I didn't see it. But for anybody that's watching this that is maybe thinking about writing, and I think a lot of folks out there that they either start writing because they got this burning story to tell, or they're writing because they've got these burning things in their head that's very much a part of themselves, maybe a big thing that they went through, a big trauma that they went through. and they feel that getting that on paper in a story form could be a good thing. Do you have any advice for people that are trying to write something that's that personal where, they're going to come across some pretty tough stuff? They're probably going to trigger a few things that maybe they didn't even realize was buried inside of them that's maybe very ugly, that's got some sharp edges that can only come out when they're writing that on the paper, and maybe how they go through that. Because you made me think of that question to ask to you when you're talking about how Morgan helped you to get through the vampire story, and then you mentioned about Clockwork Raven wouldn't have been written without Morgan as well. That was obviously a very personal story for you too, going through the worst part of your life. I don't know if that's something conscious that you've even thought about, or maybe something you had to learn about by going through it yourself.
I
Is there
think that as long as you can stand it, go through it. And on the days that you can't, find something else to distract you. Because in a real way, having someone to talk to is a distraction, but it's also someone to work to like talk about what is in fact going on emotionally inside you. But the writing of the book allows a lot of that to be released, and that release can be very cathartic, but it can be very difficult to get through. I don't know that I would have survived without help, but I don't know that I was in a place where I knew to ask for help. I just happened to have it. Um, and sometimes that help can just be getting out of your own head for a little while, doing something else, not to put aside the book for any length of time or the project for any length of time, sure, but to get away from it for a day. And there were a couple of days where I took a trip to the coast. I was in Florida. I took a trip to the coast to visit with somebody and maybe see the museum at Cape Canaveral or the space shuttle or something like that. Go for a walk in a botanical garden if you've got one, and visit something like that. And do a different type of art. I had a friend in Florida that I would meet every couple of weeks. We would just go on hikes. We're just walking. And one day we walked to a botanical garden, and I brought my camera. It's an entirely different art form. It gave me something else to focus on, a different kind of a distraction to get me through that. But in the end, it's really just a matter, like, it's the way I feel about the emotion, the grief, the sadness, the anger, the frustration, all of that. I feel like you just have to experience it, have to go through it. And you'll be better off going through it than holding it back or trying not to go through it. And I think that writing that book, even though I haven't sold it yet, very few people have seen it, writing that book helped me get through something that I might not have gotten through otherwise.
and through the process of getting through that, and then also doing that through the, I guess, on the platform of writing the story, did you find that it just happened that you were writing the story and that the stuff that you really need to get out, the cathartic part of it, was, did you find that try to build the story around that part of what you needed to get out so that the story would fit that? Or did you find that you just found as you were writing that it just naturally is something that was on your mind, and it kind of entwined with the story in a way that works, so that somebody reading this wouldn't be, okay, well, now John's talking about his trauma, or now Rick is talking about his trauma as he's writing these words? Or did you find that it just sort of all happened organically, where the two of them were, you had no choice, you couldn't run away from either the story idea and the trauma that you're trying to get out?
I think it happened organically, But I also was aware that I was writing a book that was going to cover my experiences of Madrid, good and bad, the whole thing, because it was a rough trip in some places other than just that, but that kind of overshadows everything.
Yeah.
Um, but all of that played into it. But the good things also. There were things about Madrid that I absolutely loved. And when I first got there, there was magic to that city that was unique to Madrid. And after the diagnosis, I kind of lost touch with that. But I feel like it still exists. And I even wonder if I return to Madrid now, it has been over 5 years. Um, would I be able to get in touch with that magic again? Would I at least be able to feel a hint of it somewhere? Or would I be better off going someplace else where I haven't yet experienced the magic?
Well, and I remember you were saying that previously that you thought that you have to go back in a sense just to find out. Like, do you think that that's something that's important enough that would you be okay leaving that magic behind in Madrid so that it can go off and have its own life on its own, or do you think that's something you'd have to see if you're still a part of it?
That city has existed for over 500 years. That magic was there before me, and that magic will be there after I'm gone. So it's going to be fine without me. And I will be fine either way.
Yeah.
Uh, and I'm not sure at this point, I'm not sure if going back will bring back the magic or bring back the um, the grief, but the loss. I'm not sure which one's going to be stronger. To be honest, it would probably do both.
That's a pretty big trip to find that out and be there and wonder what the heck you were thinking in the first place. Some things are better left to curiosity.
And I don't think I'd do it as a trip by itself. First of all, I would have to have somebody going with me who
Yeah.
knows everything, that knows everything.
Yeah.
And second, it would probably be best if that was followed up with like 3 weeks in Prague, which I've never been to and I know has magic. So,
That's good. So that would just be a component of it as you're doing other stuff.
like a prelude to another part of it, another part of a trip. Like it would be a stop.
Yeah, because I would think that whatever you found to be in Madrid or not to be in Madrid for you, at least at this point, it probably would make sense to have something else so that you can either, I don't celebrate that reunion or celebrate letting something go, perhaps.
I don't know. I don't know what it'll be when I get there. I know I didn't speak the language well when I was there, and I speak it less well now.
Right. So you have to find somebody who can at least maybe navigate that part of it too. And
I don't need that because I can navigate the city without the language.
Hmm.
So I lived there and familiar enough, and I have a map. I have a GPS on my phone, and I have a translator on my phone. I can do the things that I need to
that's it.
do. But I would need someone essentially to be my Watson, for me to tell the stories to the good and the bad. I think that would be the only way to actually, I don't know if purge is the right way, but I don't know if purge is the right word. It would be the only way to get through that kind of a trip.
Right, where you've got somebody that can act as a bit of a ground and somebody that can bring you back to your baseline again and keep you, I guess, your foot firmly on the ground with a little bit of rationale and okayness.
Oh, we'll see what happens. Right now I've got to renew my passport before I go to anywhere. So
Yeah. And now, are that vampire novel too? Going back to that a little bit, are we? Do you think we will see that in publication?
yeah,
I mean, vampires are hot again. You know, Universal is. I think so.
okay, yeah. No, we
I think
will
so.
definitely see that at some.
Well, I guess we'll
how
find it soon. Nosferatu's coming out, I think, and
sure.
whatever it's coming out actually looks fantastic. The trailer looks amazing. And
Yeah, I expect that it will come out in some form, but I don't necessarily know where or how or when yet. But those are answers I might have an answer. I might have tomorrow.
right, as you get thinking about that because you're doing things. You're certainly become quite the hybrid author now too, because you've got a lot of stuff with, some very reputable small press publishers, but then you're also doing some things on your own with your own imprint as well with Dark Fluidity, which I
I've
think is
always
pretty awesome.
I've always believed that it was best to be diverse in that way. Have different publishers, different people doing different things, and I've never really believed in stopping. So when I said earlier about like taking a day to breathe,
Right.
I lied. I would probably take an hour and then get fidgety and then need to do something, and suddenly I'm writing it. That isn't even one of the ones that I've got planned.
But this other great thing about being a writer is that you can literally stare at a wall. Well, literally, as you were talking before about, that one job that you had where you're staring at this massive wall that goes up for 20 feet and other, and
Well, that wasn't a job. That was where I lived.
where you lived. Oh, okay. Well, the point is you're staring at a wall
Yes.
and you found inspiration in a wall and you can literally stare at a wall and you're a writer at work, because there's always gears turning and always words come and they just haven't, you just don't have that conduit of a pen all the time, but you're still writing.
I always
Yeah, it's a bit of a blessing and a curse, I suppose.
it is. It is definitely.
Yeah, I've always wanted to do that too. Where I've always got a pen on me, and I should have pens, but I feel like such a poser because my girlfriend will say, "Hey, I need a pen or something." I'm a writer. I can find you a pen, and I can't find any pens whatsoever, and I'm just a failure. I'm a poser. But my phone, I've got all kinds of notepads and stuff like that I keep notes on as well. So I guess as long as you've got something.
There are probably 100 pens within 5 feet of me, and half of them are fountain pens because I just love the look and feel of things. There is now there are 2 stacks of small notepads off to my side this direction. There are bigger notepads over in that direction. And there is an entire box under my printer, which is under the desk, that has the full size notepads. I've got them all.
And what do you find that does for you, John? Like when you're writing, you're doing the actual cursive as opposed to just banging keys on a keyboard. Do you find that there's some other kind of magic that goes on that you're just not going to get from banging that out? Oh, there's my boy Mackenzie. Hey, buddy. Well, John says hello. I've got my headphones on so he can't hear you.
Yeah.
A little bit. A little bit, buddy. Sir, you're saying about the magic? Watch out, bud.
Yes. So the magic of writing by hand, I like the way you phrased the question at the beginning, but then I did not like the way you ended.
Oh,
You said, "Is there a magic? Is there an other magic to doing it by hand?" And then you said that you can't get on the keyboard. It is a different other magic. It is definitely not the same process as writing on the keyboard, but that is still magic. I mean, that's part of the reason why this book came out about magic, is because I believe in magic because I experience it every day.
right.
The whole idea of writing is a kind of magic. Cooking. My kitchen is over in that direction. Cooking is a kind of alchemy. You're changing,
Oh,
you're
absolutely.
adding fire to something and changing it from one thing to another. It's, we have magic all the time. And the idea of creating, whether it be fiction or painting or illustration or animation, whatever it is another kind of magic. So when I'm writing by hand, that is a different kind of magic than writing on a keyboard. But it is still both hard types of magic. And I sometimes I feel like a project needs one over the other. So like, there's a project I'm working on now on a little white notepad that is 3 feet beyond my hand in this direction. Um, that needs to be written by hand. And I'm writing that with a very fancy fountain pen, one I got myself as a gift for something I accomplished in 2017. That pen is, the brand is Visconti, and it is a Van Gogh based, Starry Night based pen. Like the colors
Okay.
from that painting, and that painting is one of my favorites of all time.
It's gorgeous.
And I've been close enough to it that I could have looked it. I didn't, but I was there, and I was like, I could. I don't know what that says about me. That was like one of my first thoughts. There is like nobody's stopping me from like.
You could, I've no judgment here.
But I never realized how three-dimensional the oil on the canvas is on that. Like the strokes of heat on that painting are thick and vibrant, not just color-wise, but like sculpturally in a way.
That's incredible. And you never get that just looking at some digitized version of it on.
Never get if you're from a picture of it or from the computer or something. But
Yeah.
I was right next to it, right on top of it. There was no glass between me and it. I could smell the oil. And like I said, I could have licked it, which I believe would make it mine.
In some cultures, that is true.
Yes.
Whether or not it's that particular culture or, that moment would have been yours. The painting, maybe not so much. Freedom after doing that, maybe not so much. But that moment, 100% would have been yours. And you could be,
I don't know what you're here for.
I never painted.
The Museum of Modern Art might have to answer some questions after that. It's like, possession, licking is 9/10 of the law, right?
Yeah,
It's like possession.
Yeah, absolutely. That's incredible. And it reminds me of there's a Doctor Who episode where it's a David Tennant actor which were I think are the best ones, and he, at least the more modern ones anyways, where he goes back with Rose, which was also my favorite assistant. Was it? Yeah, it was with Rose.
It was Amy.
Was it Amy? Oh, Amy Pond.
Yes.
Oh, so that I was completely off on that. Then that would have been the Matt. Yeah, that would have been Matt Smith then. I believe
it was Matt Smith and Amy Pond. That's right.
That's right. Yeah, and they were back there and they met Van Gogh, and I'd never forget that scene. Speaking of magic, was incredible where he's laying on the grass under the stars and looking up, and you're getting the viewpoint from Van Gogh, and everything is just swirling around, these beautiful constellations, and things were swooping through the sky, these brilliant, vibrant colors. And yeah, it's just an amazing scene. And, I imagine he probably would have appreciated a scene like that too. So yeah, there's magic everywhere.
I've seen the sky like that too. Not often. Not when I lived in a city. But in Australia, I saw hints of that, but there's not as many stars visible in the Southern Hemisphere. In Maine, I had a couple of nights where it was the most vividly I'd been able to see the Milky Way and just all of the stars in the sky. I don't get that a lot where I am now either, because most places where we live, there's just too much light.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the closest I came to that is I was driving through, everybody watch this if it doesn't know, I'm Canadian, might have guessed the wonky accent. But when I was driving through Calgary, of course, I've heard all the amazing things about out west, Western Canada, having these amazing, you can see the, Borealis, help me out here, John.
You were.
Yes. And it was awesome. So I thought we were driving at nighttime through there. So it was great. We're coming back from Jasper Park. going out to Fort McMurray, driving into Fort McMurray. So we're driving through Calgary, and I thought, this is the moment I've been waiting for. This is awesome. And it was so cloudy. So overcast. I was so disappointed. But every once in a while, there'd be like this little break. And it was almost like somebody was just punching through the clouds with this brilliant paintbrush and just thought, here you go, buddy. Here's a few magical swirls for you. And it was incredible. But it was just, I felt like I was looking at paint because that's all I got was just these little tastes of what was there. I couldn't quite get to that canvas.
There are several things that I want to do in life, and one of those things is to see the aurora, whether it's the aurora borealis or the aurora australis. Doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
I probably actually want to see both, but I have never seen it. I've almost always lived too far away. There were a couple of days earlier this year where you could have seen it from where I live.
Yeah.
Hadn't been overcast like it was.
Exactly how it was with us too. Yeah. They're saying it's perfect over here, but then it got cloudy.
But I've lived much further north than this too. I mean, I lived in northern New York State, practically in Montreal. That's how far north I was.
Okay.
Compared to where I am now, probably 300 or 400 miles. And I still never saw the aurora.
Wow, there's magic there.
I definitely want to.
I mean, I saw it for maybe barely a beat. I mean, it might have taken me, if I said the word marshmallow, the little glimpse that I saw wouldn't have lasted as long as it took me to say marshmallow. It was, but just, and there's only a few times that I was there's enough cloud break that I saw this thing. It was just enough that I thought, I need to see more of that. Like, that was just awe-inspiring for the little glimpses that I got.
Reykjavik is on my list of places to go, and I am hoping to be able to see the aurora from there. I just have to plan it for a time when you're most likely to see the aurora.
Absolutely. Well, you're going to have to get connected and talk with Fred Legault. So anybody that doesn't know, she's been on my podcast before too, so you guys can go and talk to her because this huge.
You know her? We went.
Yeah, she probably knows where it is. Because she's an amateur astrologist, and for example, the eclipse that happened, I remember at the last AuthorCon I was chatting with her, and she's like, yeah, we were waiting for that. Then I knew it was coming like 20 years ago. So she follows all these patterns, I guess, and she knows
eclipses are easy to predict. I mean, they could tell you for hundreds of years the date of every eclipse, whether it's a solar or lunar eclipse, that we're going to experience because they know when those are going to happen and where they're going to be visible. The aurora is more based on solar activity, what happens on the surface of the sun. And I don't think that is as easily predictable. We can sometimes get some advance notice of that, but it's not by centuries or decades or years. I think at best we might get weeks, but I don't know that for certain because I am not an astrologer. I am not an astronomer. I have a friend who is an astrophysicist. My day job, I don't work with astrophysicists. I work with biologists and chemists.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
So I know a lot of smart people, but I don't know anybody who can tell me exactly when to go to somewhere to see the aurora. But I do know there's seasons that are better for it, that it is more likely to happen. And if I go for 2 weeks during the season when you're most likely to see it, then I probably will. I guess. Maybe I should go for 2 months.
And just camp out and wait. It's like hunting for stars.
I could do something. Iceland is notorious for its love of books and authors and book writing culture. I probably could do it.
You get a residence?
I don't know. I haven't looked into any details. If somebody out there wants to contact me and tell me how to make this happen, or better, wants to just make it happen for me.
Absolutely. We'll start a GoFundMe account or something. Or if there's any Icelandic people watching this, or maybe even Alaska, I hear Alaska's pretty good for that too.
I'm not going to go into much detail about this, but I have co-written a poetry book with someone from Iceland. But
so you've got roots.
no idea when that's going to come out. And she does not live in Iceland. She lives in Sweden.
Okay. That's not too far though, right? Hop, skip, and
We could still see the aurora, but Reykjavik had already been on my list for years anyway. It's number 2 on the list of places I want to go in Europe, because there's still places I want to go in Asia that I've never been to. There's still places I want to go in Australia that I've never been to. And I lived there for over 2 years. And in the United States, even, I've lived here for most of my life. Pointing because the country is
it's all around you.
there, it's there, it's there, it's there.
Yeah. It's everywhere but over here, this guy.
Yes.
But yeah, that's how it goes though, isn't it? I mean, even on Ontario, just the one province where I'm living in now, there's so many beautiful places out here to explore and get inspired by and enjoy. And I guess I could talk to you all day long, John. That's the problem and the awesome thing about chatting with you. And when this bad boy comes out, we're definitely going to have to link up again so I can talk to you more about this too. I have not read this one yet, but that's okay because I'll be able to read this before it officially comes out. So I will officially read it. But one thing I want to ask you kind of and kind of wrapping things up here is, speaking of inspiration and magic, this is a chance for you. And I know you said you're terrible at elevator things, but that's okay because I happen to live in the land of the CN Tower, and it's a pretty long elevator ride. So by all means, take your time with this elevator pitch. But what do you say to people to inspire them to enter your theater as far as what they can expect going into the theater and maybe what they can expect coming out of the secret palace of the theater?
I think you should go into it expecting to believe in magic. Then everything that accompanies that, which means good and bad, which means joyful and also dangerous, beautiful and also deadly. And you might not survive, but you will love every minute of it. I hope you good luck.
Well, yeah, very well said about that. And I think 100%. I mean, you're essentially, in talking about danger, the stakes don't really get any higher. It's not just talking about people that are in present time having to worry about their own world crumbling. It's, you have entire ages of mankind and outer worlds that are at risk in this one. So, and I think if anybody goes into this maybe not believing in magic, or kind of like, yeah, let's see if I can believe in magic, if this is going to fly with me, I think that as somebody that's been through this, certainly the book, by the time they get to the end of it, they're going to believe in it no matter what. I think they have no choice. And they're going to live at their own worlds very, very differently.
And I hope that at some point during it, they find a palace theater of their own, whether it's called Palace or something else, and send me pictures.
Absolutely. Please, yeah, send pictures. And if you guys want to put links or comments down below as well with the pictures, I will make sure that John gets all those. Always a pleasure, my friend.
Thank you.